Welcome everyone to the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network press conference, Women for Climate Justice, Leading Solutions on the Front Lines of Climate Change. My name is Osprey Orielle, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. I want to thank our esteemed panelists here for participating in this press conference to share their important perspectives and their voices, and they each will be introducing themselves in turn. Grassroots, frontline, and Indigenous women are gathered at COP26 to strategize and accelerate our collective efforts to halt the worst impacts of the climate crisis, to stop extractivism, and protect our lands, forests, water, and our children's future. And we also do not forget the voices of women and feminist leaders who are not here. There has been serious inequities playing out at this COP, and it has made this COP not the inclusive COP as it was so loudly proclaimed to be, but rather quite exclusive. And we've worked very hard to bring our colleagues here through video and all other different means of participation, but we all know this has been quite exclusive process. Women, feminists, and gender-diverse leaders continue to be underrepresented, and only 16% of the COP26 UK leadership has been women, yet our voices are absolutely essential. It's also important to highlight that violence against the earth is directly linked to violence against women, and that the current dominator society of patriarchy, colonization, racism, and capitalism is actually based upon power over and exploitation of women, the land, and peoples of color. So we really want to get to these root causes, which is what's really going to, in the long term, solve the climate crisis, as well as dealing with immediate crises on the ground. We also need this systemic change. Women standing for climate justice refuse to accept this current paradigm. Given current country commitments, and some that were even made last week at the COP, we are still heading to a catastrophic rise in global temperatures by the end of the century. Quite simply, this is a death sentence, and we do not accept this lack of action. Importantly, women and feminists can and are making a significant difference in changing our current trajectory, and we need to accelerate the leadership and visibility of women, especially Indigenous, Black, Brown, and grassroots women. Study after study shows it's paramount to recognize that there will be no significant action on climate change until women's struggles and leadership and solutions are at the forefront. And we are seeing so much action on the ground. We were just having a session about how much women are having what looks like very small actions in their community around food security and food sovereignty and Indigenous knowledge practices and all kinds of work that women are doing. And from a corporate perspective, it looks like nothing's going on, but when you add up all these small pieces, the communities are leading the way. But we also need to have there not be interference in these solutions. WECAN is highlighting a feminist analysis and women's leadership through the demands of the women and gender constituency and through our WECAN collective call to action that was recently delivered to governments and financial institutions by the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice that we hosted just this last September at the United Nations General Assembly. And all of this information can be found online. This is our call to action, but it also comes with a series of frameworks that are really important guidance for governments and financial institutions. This call to action from women and feminists around the world represents millions of people outlining in explicit detail what can be done to meet the 1.5-degree target with already existing climate justice frameworks. We included both governments and financial institutions in our recommendations because we are well aware of the power of the fossil fuel industry in these two sectors. 60% of the largest banks in the world have collectively financed $3.8 trillion in fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement. And the recent report by the UN Environment Program found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So the question that we're bringing is, how can we successfully navigate COP26 with these impossible numbers? This is the big elephant in the room, is what is going on with the supply chain, the fossil fuel end. As we know that the Paris Climate Agreement doesn't even mention oil, gas, or coal. So we really need to call on our governments while we're here to do something about this relationship with governments and the fossil fuel industry directly. The question is, where are the government leaders willing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry? And where is the $100 billion a year promised from wealthy countries so we can move towards a just transition? So many of our Global South partners are saying we need help, and they do. We can move billions once we claim a global climate emergency, trillions, and pulling from the military budgets is a good place to begin. I find my deepest hope in how we will navigate this moment with women leaders around the world. We are in the streets, we are in the fields, we are in the boardrooms, and in the halls of power. We are putting our bodies on the line. Some of us are getting arrested, criminalized, subjected to pain compliance. Some of us have been murdered for standing up for the last of the clean water, the last of the forests, for what we hold as sacred, for the last chance for our climate and a livable future. What is happening now is not only unjust, but it's actually insane, and we have to stop it. In our call to action, we are supporting the immediate implementation of the Glasgow Agreement to protect land defenders, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, community-led solutions, rights of nature, and much more. We do not accept false solutions, such as market-based mechanisms presented in Article 6. We are saying our Earth is not for sale, and we want pollution stopped at the source. We will not allow for sacrifice people and sacrifice zones, or corporate colonialism, or incremental transitions to renewable energy, or false solutions like carbon offset schemes. We want real zero, not net zero. Rather, we are willing to fight for real solutions, solutions based on climate justice and respect for the natural laws of our Earth, and to use our imaginations to be alive, to thrive, to be courageous, and to be uncomfortable for positive changes, to be bold and to win. We are willing to endlessly fight for policies that prioritize social, racial, and economic justice and Indigenous and human rights. It's a call to action from women and feminists around the world so we can meet the 1.5-degree target with real solutions from climate justice. And what we are saying is we can act now and we must act now, and we are rising, and we ask you to rise with us. And with that, I hand the floor to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey. My name is Sostine Namanya. I work for an organization called NAPE, and we are based in Uganda. I think my message for me here today is the fact that I come from a continent that emits little, but also is highly impacted by the climate crisis. And the conversation we need to steer at this particular moment is to appreciate that there is a lot of people and power when people come together. And this is very crucial for change. I know majority people are working towards climate action issues globally, and we appreciate that, and we are in them in solidarity, and also the youth that are actually taking different actions to urge for quick action now. I would want to urge all those to be able to work with frontline communities that are actually facing these crises yesterday, today, and even tomorrow. So that would be my also quick demand and message that I would love to put out there. And additionally, it's about the movement. There is now the COP movement that we are all part of. But a movement is also crucial to bring about transformation. If it is just, and that's when we'll see the transition, but also that's when we'll see that the movement is for everyone, not for a few people, because they have a say and the things that they are proposing are prescriptive in nature. So we all need to have a voice on how the solutions are centered, and that's how we'll be able to move forward. I think also my last message would be around the fact that as we do all this, we need to understand and appreciate and center and document that the people that are actually being affected by this crisis are people who have least actually contributed to it, and that's mostly people in the global south. They are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, the dirty energy, and the false solutions that Osprey also talked about. And this is an emergency, which he also talked about, and our solution is climate justice now. We need it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Please go ahead, Sonia.
Olá, olá, boa tarde. Agradeço mais uma vez a oportunidade, né? Temos que falar aqui rapidinho, temos pouco tempo e temos também pouco tempo para agir.
And so, good afternoon. I have to be quick, so we don't have so much time to speak. But I also like to remind you that we also have little time to act.
A COP está acontecendo, mas o planeta continua esquentando, apesar do frio que faz aqui.
As COP26 is taking place, we are still leading with rising temperatures that are taking place, even though we're pretty cold over here.
De nada servir os acordos firmados em 26 conferências, porque as emissões só continuam aumentando a cada ano.
All the agreements that have been made along 26 conferences haven't really had that much of impact because we are still seeing rising temperatures every year.
Nossos territórios indígenas continuam sendo destruídos e negados.
Our indigenous territories are still being destroyed and denied us.
Nossos direitos continuam sendo retirados.
Our rights are still being stripped away.
E as lideranças continuam sendo mortas por defender a Mãe Terra.
And indigenous leaders are still being murdered for defending Mother Earth.
Todos já sabem a solução.
Everyone knows the solution.
Todos os governos já sabem a solução para conter a crise climática.
All governments already know the solution to stop the climate crisis.
Mas eles negam que a solução está na proteção dos territórios dos povos originários.
But governments deny that the solution lies in protecting indigenous territories.
É preciso proteger os territórios, as águas, mares e oceanos, as florestas e a terra.
It is crucial and necessary to protect our territories, the waters, the oceans, the airs, and the earth.
Mas eles insistem em negar que a solução está nos nossos modos de vida.
But governments insist in denying that the solution lies in our ways of living.
Continuam sendo teimosos, querendo acreditar que somente as tecnologias inovadoras é que vão reduzir as mudanças climáticas.
They are still very stubborn in recognizing and thinking that only innovation technology can fix the problem to the crisis that we're facing.
Mas não há tecnologia mais inovadora do que proteger as árvores.
But there is no greater innovation in technology than simply protecting trees.
Quem aqui nunca gostou, nunca quis se refrescar à sombra de uma árvore?
Is there anyone else in this room who has never wanted to freshen up by the shadow of a tree, for example?
É preciso acreditar na ciência, mas é preciso também valorizar os conhecimentos tradicionais dos povos indígenas como ciência.
It is important to believe in science, but it's also important to recognize indigenous people's customs and understanding as a way of science too.
Porque é dentro dos territórios indígenas que está 82% da biodiversidade que ainda está protegida no mundo.
Because it is within indigenous territories that lies 82% of the world's biodiversity.
E isso corresponde a 1/4 de carbono estocado.
And that means 1/4 of captured carbon.
E esse carbono está ameaçado
And this carbon is threatened
pela ganância para atender o capitalismo.
by the greed to supply for the demands of capitalism.
Imagine se todos esses territórios forem desmatados, forem queimados, o quanto de emissões que não vão ser transmitidas na atmosfera.
Imagine if all these territories are burned up and degraded. Imagine just how much carbon would go up into the atmosphere.
Então, para conter a crise climática, é preciso proteger os direitos culturais dos povos indígenas.
And so in order to stop the climate crisis, we must respect the cultural rights of indigenous people.
É preciso demarcar os nossos territórios.
We need to have our territories marked up as our own.
E não haverá solução para a crise climática se não considerar a participação, a consulta e os direitos de nossos povos.
And there will be no solution to the climate crisis if there is no the participation, the prior and informed consent to our people and our territories.
A hora de agir é agora.
The time to act is now.
E embora tenhamos 82% da biodiversidade viva no mundo, os espaços de participação indígena nesta conferência é o menor espaço.
Although we might hold and be the safeguarders of 82% of the world's biodiversity, still indigenous participation in decision-making spaces is very little.
Nós esperamos uma justiça climática que combata a violência contra as mulheres.
We need to talk about a climate justice that is fighting the violence committed against women,
Que combata o feminicídio
that fights the feminicide and the murdering of women,
e que pare de matar nossas lideranças.
and that stops murdering our leaders.
Hoje, todas as pessoas que defendem a terra são ameaçadas, são perseguidas ou são assassinadas.
Today, all the people who are defenders of Earth are threatened, are chased, and are murdered.
E de nada vai adiantar anúncio de bilhões de dólares se não houver esse respeito a essa diversidade cultural e territorial.
And it is pointless to speak of agreements of billions of dollars if our cultural diversity cannot be respected and included in this.
São os nossos modos de vida que garantem a biodiversidade protegida.
It is our traditional ways of living that guarantee and secure the biodiversity on Earth.
E se o nosso modo de vida está ameaçado, a biodiversidade também está em risco.
And if our ways of living is threatened, also the biodiversity is threatened.
E se a biodiversidade está em risco, a humanidade inteira está ameaçada.
And if the biodiversity itself is at risk, all of humanity is at risk.
Para o coronavírus, foi inventada uma vacina para conter a pandemia.
For example, with coronavirus, there has been a vaccination that was created in order to stop the virus.
Mas para conter as mudanças climáticas, nós dependemos somente da consciência dos humanos.
But in order to stop the climate crisis, we only depend on human consciousness.
Obrigada.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we were all going to introduce ourselves, but it didn't quite go as smoothly as I wanted. So let me just take a moment to say that to my left is Sostine Namanya. She is the Gender and Food Security Officer from the National Association of Professional Environmentalists from Uganda. And you just heard from Sonia Guajajara from the Guajajara people. She's the Executive Coordinator of the Articulation of the Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. So I'm going to change it up a little bit and do it this way. And let me now introduce Casey Camp-Horinek from the Ponca Nation. She's an environmental ambassador, and we're really honored to have her be a board member of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. Thank you so much, Sonia, for your comments, and also Sostine. And now we'll hear from Casey.
Latia, Juzi Witike Ponca, Mashte Ponca, Oklahoma. I'm a Ponca woman from Oklahoma, a matriarch of a large family over there, and I've been telling everyone here as well that I'm just a little bit Scottish from 5 generations back, and so I'm sporting the McDonald tartan, and that is actually my family's background as well. So I'm very proud to be here in the homeland. I almost brought a Ponca flag and planted it, and this land is mine. No, just kidding. I'm really grateful to be here among you right now. I'm very serious about one thing, and that is our continued life on earth as human beings. We are in a finite state of being right now. The gas and the oil that has lived inside the earth for all these millenniums are being pulled out and extracted by a greedy group of people who are very top-heavy. I was told earlier today that for every one Indigenous person that is here at COP26, that there are 2 people from the fossil fuel regime. And what are they doing here? They're manipulating. We're not being allowed into the final decision-making process, even though the majority of the impact is where we live. We're not the people who are making the problem. We're not the ones who emit the pollution, but we're the ones who are being killed from it. The Ponca people of Oklahoma are literally dealing with environmental genocide. The air, the earth, and the water is completely poisoned where we live. People say, grow a garden. We can't grow organic food within an 8-mile radius of our tribal headquarters, where our elders live, where our children go to school. Our babies are being born with cancer if they make it to birth. We're having our little children so used to having asthma that they know to trade inhalers when they go to school if they forget something to help them breathe. That's how heavy the air is. And that air doesn't stay still, and that water doesn't stay still. It is blowing over where you live now. Those jet streams are dipping further and further south and further north as a result of the melting of the polar caps. Life is changing as we know it. Within the indigenous cosmology, we have some answers. We live close to the earth. We have just been a little while removed from her knowledges, and she still shares with us within our ceremonial ways and within our observations of who is coming into our territory, the new animals, the new birds, who is being killed, who no longer exists. And we can tell you now that we have just this much time left, folks, in order to turn this ship around. The oil and the gas industry has to be part of a just transition. We can no longer allow them to rule the world and to be subsidized by the large countries like that's in the United States, where the United States gives them huge tax breaks. And at the same time, the poor people are suffering even more and can't have food sovereignty. Within our territory, we have enacted in our sovereignty a statute called Rights of Nature, recognizing that as protectors of nature, we're protecting ourselves. We are nature, protecting ourselves as humans. If you eat, if you breathe, if you drink today, then you have had part of nature come inside you. And therefore, your cellular makeup is part of that right now. And you must set yourself aside from the ego, like we'd like the extractive industry, the fossil fuel people to do, and say, what do we want for the 7 generations to come? Don't they have a right to have air to breathe? Then quit the carbon trading stuff. Quit thinking you can buy and sell the air and it's going to be okay. The United Nations is doing that right now in Article 6. They have already commodified the trees, the earth, the water, and now they've entered into this carbon trading nonsense. It's time for each and every human to take responsibility for their behavior. And not only for their behavior, but for the behavior of the people that we put in office. The ones that call themselves leaders. I no longer think that they deserve that title. Leaders put themselves at the last and take care of the ones in front of them and the ones coming behind them. Do any of these people here think in that manner, a circular economy or extractivism and building personal wealth? I have a great-granddaughter that was born on Monday. I have to make sure that everyone understands life itself is at stake.
Thank you very much, Casey. Thank you to all of the speakers. And I think we all will just have a moment to each have just like a 30-second wrap up here. But I wanted to say something, especially on the note of what the panelists have said, and also to really acknowledge Sonia Guajajar and a lot of the Indigenous people who have made their way here from the Global South, the effort it has been for them to leave their families, to leave their communities, how hard it has been for them to get here. And we really want to make sure that their voices are heard. And we hear talk about how Indigenous peoples have knowledge and solutions. They need to be in the top rooms here. We need to get this very straightened out, and particularly the Indigenous women who have been the backbone of their movements, who are literally risking their lives to protect the last of the forest and the water for all of us. I mean, let's get very real here about who needs to be having this discussion and what would happen if we had matriarchs in the room, frontline matriarchs leading the way. The thing I wanted to say, because a lot of times we are told that we're being naive at our organization, as an example, because we are asking governments to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, or that they must stop further extraction or expansion of the fossil fuel industry, or stop continuing deforestation and supporting companies that are having forest commodities. So when we talk to the government or we talk to financial institutions, we have a lot of engagement with some of the top management in many banks and with asset managers over years talking about divesting from fossil fuels. And I really want it to be clear that we are not naive. We are very clear that the government has its frameworks in which it's operating under, and we get the feedback that they can't make these changes at this point, and why don't we understand that? Or we hear from the financial sector that, you know, this is their job to make this amount of money every year, and this is how the financial industry works. And we tell them, you need to stop funding fossil fuels. And what I want to be very clear is that we are not naive. We are very clear that the political frameworks that we're in and the economic frameworks we're in do not respect the land, do not respect the sacred systems of life, do not respect frontline communities, and that we don't want sacrificed people. So it might be working for some corporations for a little while longer, and for wealthy nations for a little while longer, but it's not working for the majority of us. So yes, we are demanding systems change, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but it can also lead to the healthy and just world we seek. So let's be really clear that the people who have a lot of power, so to speak, and wealth, they're going to have to change what they're doing. That is what we're demanding. We're not being naive. We're being very clear about what seventh generation really is, seventh generation thinking is, and really caring for communities and our families and the earth. And with that, let's just go ahead and let everyone have a final few moments of words.
Yeah, I think for me, the other day I was talking to someone and they were saying, look, why are you saying forests are going? Forests are alive. There are trees. And I asked her, what type of trees are alive? You're cutting indigenous pristine forests. You're replacing them with palm oil. You're replacing them with sugar cane. And you think that's green. So everything that you plant in the name of commercialization and profit making, that is not conservation. That is not something that is going to support the absorption of the emissions that we are fighting against. Forests are the lungs of the earth. So they should go untampered and untouched. And just like the rest of the speakers said, I think it is our moment to just rise up and say no to these type of developments and exercise no as a right in its own standing. Thank you.
Bom, falamos da emergência climática, da urgência que é, né, mudar de posição, mudar de posturas agora, porque os sinais já estão muito claros, né? A própria pandemia é um sinal de que nós precisamos, né, proteger a natureza para evitar que outros vírus como esse, que outras pandemias venham, porque se nós sofremos tanto com a pandemia agora, nós podemos sofrer muito mais com o aumento das mudanças climáticas.
And now we are speaking of an emergency. We are facing an emergency, a global emergency. And just for example, the pandemic in which we all went through right now, this is another consequence of a climate crisis. But if we don't stop our actions and we don't change the way we are leading things, we will see more pandemics, and this is yet another continuation of this crisis.
E apesar desse cenário catastrófico, né, os fundos econômicos, os investidores, continuam investindo na ganância do capitalismo que segue destruindo o planeta.
And even though we are looking at pretty catastrophic scenarios, we still see governments investing in funds that will further the destruction of our planet.
Vamos voltar daqui ainda muito preocupados, mas também não queremos que o artigo 6, que seja firmado um acordo no artigo 6 aqui de qualquer jeito. É melhor que não se firme acordo nenhum.
We will come back from this event still very worried, but most of all, we wish that Article 6 is in no way an agreement that is made. It is better that no agreement whatsoever is made on behalf of Article 6.
É preciso continuarmos fazendo essa pressão. Toda a sociedade civil, os movimentos sociais, precisamos continuar fazendo pressão junto aos governos, né, todos nós aqui, cada um nos seus países, para pressionar, né, os chefes das nações, os governos, para mudarem sua posição de pensar somente em dinheiro e pensar nos direitos culturais e pensar, né, no bem viver de toda a humanidade.
We need to put pressure globally as civil society, all in different parts of the world, and to our governments, in order to contain and withhold the implementation of the funds that are still envisioning the destruction of the planet.
Tá, obrigada.
Remember that someone sacrificed for you to be alive. Somebody in your ancestry cared enough about you that they prayed you here. They made a way for you to be here. They found a piece of land that they might be able to grow food on. They sacrificed a great deal. It's time for us to do the same thing. All of the things that they said, let's do those. But let's hold accountable the mass murderers, the millions of people that are killed today because of the fossil fuel industry, deserve us to stand up for their memory. For all the cancers that they cause, for all the breathing problems that they cause, for all the children who don't make it because they don't have food to eat or a place to be, and because there are deserts where there used to be water and water where there used to not be water. Those are directly attributable to the fossil fuel industry. It's time that they be held culpable, and it's time for a just transition, that they train the people that they keep saying, we've got to get them a job because they've got to eat. We have sympathy for them. We believe that they should be trained into a safe way of being. I saw New York putting up big barriers rather than changing their way of life. The sea level's rising. They're using whales and elephants as a way of doing carbon trading. It's sick, folks. Pity them and change it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.